and a very warm welcome to everyone. It gives me immense pleasure to be today being able to present what we have envisaged as the vision for marine spatial planning. So, in this presentation, I will introduce what is meant by modeling and simulation-based marine spatial planning, what we are working on. It's how it is basically driving most of the projects that we will be seeing coming forward by all the interns that are working on the project, how it integrates into the broader plan of MSP for us. And I'll essentially walk you through what is already operational, where we are, and what are the different zones and what are the different achievements we want to basically look at by 2029. Um, so before I get into what we are building, I think it's important for us to understand what we are solving for. So traditional MSP in India, and this is something that has been reported by the uh, World Bank report as well in 2020, that uh, existing any kind of existing operations that are happening that are revolving around traditional marine spatial planning and both in India as well as globally tends to rely on a very isolated set of data sets. So one agency maps shipping routes, the another agency maps biodiversity, a third agency manages the fisheries data, and so on. And these rarely come together or speak together. So what we see as a result is a very static spatial plan that tell you where things are, but cannot tell you what happens next. And the consequences for these things are real. So two of the examples is one, recently in Tamil Nadu, sea walls were essentially installed to prevent coastal local erosion. But without modeling how sediment flows change seasonally, the erosion simply, what was installed to curb the coastal erosion, it just simply moved the problem downstream. So adjacent fishing villages lost their beaches, the turtles that were nested in the area that got declined, and so on. Another example is also the Viringam port project that happened in Kerala, a 900 million transshipment hub that was being developed. But when it was proceeding, it did not account for how the construction would affect the local fishing communities. So by 2018, it saw a lot of mass protests and other such kind of things. So these are some of the common examples, and such kind of issues arise a lot where a simulation-based approach could have flagged these risks before the first stone was basically laid. And that's what we are aiming to achieve with our modeling and simulation-based marine spatial planning. So apart from having a traditional set, what we are bringing are two distinct approaches, a dynamism and impact modeling. So dynamism in the sense that because the traditional plans are basically snapshots, they are updated every few years or if at all. A simulation-based MSP is essentially a living system. So it ingests real-time environmental data, stakeholder input, scientific updates, all these things it will ingest real-time. And it will provide output in terms of spatial strategies continuously. So fishing zones can essentially adapt to any kind of spawning patterns. Infrastructure assessments can be reclassified after a storm changes, sediment profiles, and so on and so forth. The second part is the impact modeling, where instead of just drawing boundaries based on what the current data alone is, the simulation lets you forecast what happens if you take a specific action. So what does a new shipping lane do to any kind of underwater noise in a whale habitat? What does a port expansion do to sediment flow to a nearby coral reef? And so on and so forth. So you can test these scenarios computationally before committing resources or triggering any irreversible ecological change that will be going forward. So together, these are the two main components that move our MSP from being a very descriptive tool, like here is a map and uh, this is the output, to more of a predictive decision support tool. So what are the given options under the different routes or under the different expansions that are being made, and so on. So the architecture of the marine spatial planning essentially involves, so there are 4 or 5 different layers that we are working with. One is at the top, we have a diverse set of data streams. These are diverse in the sense they come from various different backgrounds. So oceanographic data, ecological data, vessel traffic, human activity patterns, infrastructure data. All of these feed into a simulation engine. So these essentially include, the simulation engines would be a hydrodynamic model for currents and storm surges, or an agent-based model that simulate how fishing vessels and marine mammals interact in shared space, climate projection models, and so on and so forth. And so after the data feeds into the simulation output then feeds into an impact analysis layer. So this is where the platform answers questions like what happens to the reef if we reroute the shipping from here to to a different place, or how does the coastline essentially will look like under half a meter of sea level rise, and so on and so forth. And throughout this procedure, throughout this process, we are having community engagement and stakeholder consultation across in every single part of the pipeline, because we understand that they are the ones who are the first responders, and they are the ones who are the first people who get impacted in any kind of disasters. Now, the vision that we have for MSP by 2029 is to essentially integrate these 6 different initiatives or these 6 different streams. I'll expand a bit more on what each of these essentially mean, but the marine diversity and habitat suitability stream, then the underwater noise mapping, coastal and riverine flood risk mapping, coral bleaching and risk forecasting, oil spill drift simulation pipeline, blue carbon ecosystem health. So these are the 6 different initiatives that we are planning. This is what we bring forward to you. In terms of underwater noise, so expanding a bit on each of them. In terms of underwater noise, we have the uh, most of the ambient noise in the ocean are driven by 3 different streams: the wind-driven noise, the rain noise, and the shipping noise. That's what constitutes to what the baseline noise level of the ocean is. So we essentially model these natural and anthropogenic noise sources, perform propagation corrections wherever required. And as a result, what you essentially see is a platform of cumulative acoustic stress map, so acoustic noise map that is present in the region. Um, so this moves from a traditional MSP in the sense that instead of focusing on just where the ships are present, we are essentially simulating what is the individual noise that is coming out of the ship and what is the overall noise in the region that is being constituted by the ships and the movement of the ships. So that's where the modeling and simulation aspect comes into picture. The same goes for the second part of coastal and riverine flood risk assessment. So the compounded flood problem. So there are 2 distinct flooding mechanisms that happen quite frequently. One is the rivers overflowing from any kind of upstream rainfall that happens, and any kind of storm surging that is pushes seawater inwards during cyclone. And when they coincide, that is what ends up to be the most worst hit of any kind of natural disaster. So because of this, we are building separate modules. So one is essentially for coastal surge modeling, one is for the riverine flood modeling, and then combining them using joint probability analysis so that we can see that if there is any given sea level rise under, let's say, 2050, so what does the same cyclone and what kind of impact will it look like in 2050 or any other date or any other time frame for that matter. So that's where we're bringing simulation into the picture. So, and all of this, we have enough information to validate against any kind of documented historical events, right? So whatever models we are building, we are validating against the reconstructed cyclone Amphan or cyclone Sidr or any other such kind of cyclones that have occurred to which we have the data of. The third initiative focuses on the coral bleaching and risk forecasting because bleaching occurs any kind when sea surface temperature exceeds the local historical maximum that is present in the region. But temperature, and so far temperature has been used quite extensively as a aspect of identification of coral bleaching. But temperature alone usually over predicts where the corals have adapted, and it also sometimes under predicts where there are other stressors that are present apart from just the thermal stress. So we have stressors like the acidification, turbidity, the kind amount of nutrient concentration in the region. All of these are what essentially help identify the coral reef bleaching risk. So essentially building up a model on top of the same so that what we can essentially identify is that what are the different coral reef zones where thermal refugia is essentially present. They are cooler than their neighborhood. What are the high priority conservation candidates when it comes to coral reefs? So those kind of questions are things that can be answered using this. The fourth being oil spill and drift simulation. So the core framework with using any kind of open drift simulation modeling that we have, we grab open source. Again, all of these projects are mostly done using open source data wherever feasible. And of course, with the ability to purchase data from other vendors wherever required, let's say for AIS and other such kind of places. But identifying the presence of oil spill, but more importantly, how that oil spill is going to drift in different locations is what we aim to do with this particular project per se. The blue carbon ecosystem health. So we have mangroves, seagrass, salt marshes. So these are the most carbon dense ecosystems that we have in Earth that is present. And mostly 40% of the global mangrove extent is situated inside the Indian Ocean region. So we need to be able to identify what is the existing strength of mangroves, what is the existing strength of seagrass. And again, this cannot be just based upon the data that we see in terms of availability, but also in terms of the factors, what are the existing factors that affect mangroves and how those factors have influenced the existing regions where mangroves have been present. What is the outlook 10 years down the line? So again, sustainability from a future point of view. And the last one being marine biodiversity and habitat suitability. Again, we have all of this information that we are building. what we also need to understand is instead of where the whales and sea turtles are present, we want to identify the habitat in which they usually reside in. So that basically depends upon the food that they need, the chlorophyll concentration, which is what derives that, and so on and so forth. So we model the migratory pattern, we model the habitat of these whales and dolphins instead of presenting just the what has been the last cited areas of these marine mammals. So all of this is what brings as the power for modeling and simulation based framework. So far, we established this work in 2025. So far, we have completed four different aspects of it. The SRN mapping is live today, where it, as I mentioned, it identifies the existing noise of each ship, also how much it contributes to the overall noise level in the region, so the base noise in the region. Acoustic habitat mapping for sea turtles and whales. Fishing zone mapping, identifying what are the different potential fishing zone across different dates in the Iowa region. And the beauty of the marine spatial planning is not just about bringing all the dimensions together, but essentially it's also about how each of the dimensions feeds into each other. So if I have a module of underwater noise mapping, it essentially feeds into the coral bleaching and risk forecasting to be able to identify how the noise compounds the overall bleaching risk, how the noise essentially have because again, for marine biodiversity mapping, we need to understand which of these are overlapping on top of the extreme noise level in the region. So again, the noise URN mapping module then provides input to the marine diversity and habitat suitability, and so on and so forth. So we have many such kind of mappings that essentially occurs throughout um, different modules in order to understand how what are the different impacts that exist. And this matters this matters globally, but it matters more for India because of one, extreme variability. Now, India's coastline faces some of the highest climate and human activity that we have seen. Any kind of static plan that we draw in January is already outdated by June. Second, the resource constraints. Again, to achieve a similar kind of an outcome, we would be having to put a lot of sensors everywhere, and we cannot have the capacity. We do not have the capacity to perform blanket deployment of sensors across the ocean to perform monitoring. So modeling and simulation provides a more feasible route for us as a given solution. The third being data fragmentation. Again, data exists by across different government bodies, agencies, but bringing it all together in a single place allows the bodies to work together and move forth as one unified system. So that's what we plan to build. This is what we have as a vision for what MSP is supposed to yield in 2029. And most of the projects that you will see coming forth will be introductory works that are contributing towards this broader 2029 vision of MSP that we have. Right. I would also like to take this opportunity to present and launch the Underwater Domain Awareness Journal. I'm extremely honored to do so, given the fact that we've spent a lot of efforts trying to establish a journal that focuses on scientific and research articles that are based on the underwater domain, with an esteemed set of panels of advisory board and review board that we have. Our journal focuses on three different categories of technology intervention, policy intervention, and capacity building. Um, this journal essentially is set with the focus areas of maritime security, blue economy, marine science, and cultural heritage. Our head of research, Catherine George, is the chief editor of this journal that we are establishing. So far, we have already released the first publication. We take this opportunity to present the same today. We have roughly 9 articles that are present. The first publication that is presented in UDA journal is open access to everyone. Each of these articles has been vetted again by our editorial board. And everyone is able to access these articles as a contribution as the first initiative that we are launching. Um, we do accept articles across different domains, and this is our way of providing back to the community in terms of a more scientific, and apart from the existing UDA digestion knowledge and platform that we have, UDA journal allows us to enter the mainstream with a more scientific and nuanced articles that we publish. This initiative has mostly been driven by, as I mentioned, the editor-in-chief, Catherine George. We also have Calistine Lewis, who worked along in the research team along with this. All the fellows, all the engineers are the ones who have put up this platform together. So it gives us a lot of pleasure to bring this to you in this given date and time. With that, I'll wrap up my presentation. Thank you, everyone.